In this session, we are going to learn active voice and passive voice. This is for the second semester BCom BBA program of Bengaluru North University and Bangalore University. While I am Professor Venkataramo BR, Assistant Professor of English at Government First Grade College, Good Monday. Friends, writers need to be intentional about voice in order to ensure clarity. Using active voice often improves clarity by making it clear to the reader who is taking action in the sentence, while passive voice can help avoid unnecessary repetitions. Do you want to learn much about active voice and passive voice? Please do watch the video. Let us know the contents of this video session. In this session, we are going to learn what is voice, active voice, when to use passive voice structure, how to change a sentence from active voice to passive voice, and at last we are going to know certain verbs which cannot be transformed into passive voice structure. The basic question that comes to our mind when we think about active and passive voice is, what is voice? Voice is a grammatical category that applies to the verb in a sentence. It shows the relationship between the doer of an action, subject, and the receiver of the action, the object. The voice of a verb tells whether the subject of a sentence is the doer of action or the receiver of the action. The action remains the same, but the focus changes depending upon the context. For example, R.K. Narayan wrote Malgudi Days is active voice, whereas Malgudi Days was written by R.K. Narayan is a passive voice. Friends, let us know the types of voice. Verbs generally come in two different voices. They are also said to be active voice and passive voice. If the subject is performing the action, then the sentence is an active voice. The passive voice is just a type of grammatical voice in which the subject is acted upon by the verb. The subject is the receiver of the action. An active voice is a straightforward sentence, hence it is used to deliver the sentence directly. In active voice, the person or the thing, the doer of action, is the subject of the sentence. The active voice stresses that the actor or doer of the action precedes the verb, emphasizing the subject. In active voice, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb. Active voice can make it clear to the reader who is taking the action in the sentence. In active voice, the person or the thing receiving the action is the object. Active voice follows a rule, that is subject plus verb plus object. Let us know an example here. Raman painted the house. In this example, Raman is the subject, painted is the verb, the house is the object. Let us know the passive voice in detail. In passive voice, the subject receives the action expressed by the verb. The position of the object and the subject are interchanged in the passive voice. Passive voice construction leaves out the actor or the subject. It focuses on the action than the subject. It focuses on the relationship between the verb and the object. Passive voice structure follows a rule, that is, a thing or a person receiving the action plus be form of the verb plus past participle of the verb plus by the preposition plus a thing or a person doing the action. Let's look at an example. A song is sung by him. The house was painted by Raghu. Friends, there are two kinds of verbs, active verb and passive verb. A verb is active when its form shows that the subject does some work or the subject is active. A verb is passive when its form shows something is done to the subject or the subject is not active but passive. The passive voice is less commonly used than the active voice because it is wordy and often lacks clarity. However, there are certain instances in which you might wish to use passive voice instead of the active voice. Let's look at the first example. When the subject or agent or the person who does the action is unknown, unimportant, unnecessary, or obvious or implied from the context. Let's observe some of the examples here. The temple was built 5 years ago. The mirror was broken yesterday. Jane was shot. We do not know who shot her. The church was built in 1815. Unimportant agent here. He has been arrested. It is obviously the police. The second situation when we want to use passive voice is to make more polite or formal statements. Let's look at an example. The car hasn't been cleaned. It's more polite. You haven't cleaned the car is less polite. The third one is when the action is more important than the agent. In process, instructions, events, reports, headlines, new items, and advertisements. Let's look at an example. 30 people were killed in the earthquake. Let's come to the fourth situation. It's about emphasis in the agent. Let's look at an example. The new library will be opened by the Queen. Let's come to the fifth one. When it is necessary to give importance to the object. For example, the story was written by Ramesh. The tiger was killed by the experienced hunter. The passive voice is especially helpful in scientific or technical writings or lab reports where the subject is not important but the process or the principle being described is of ultimate importance. For example, hydrochloric acid is produced when hydrogen and chlorine are mixed. The sewing machine was invented by Elias Howe. We use the passive voice to avoid responsibility for actions taken. For example, wine ads are designed to appeal especially to students. Places the burden on the ads as opposed to the burden on the designer or advertiser. We design wine ads to appeal especially to students. Here, we accept responsibility. Observe the examples given here. In the tense, let us say present tense, the active voice is he writes the letter. The passive voice is the letters are written. We see he wrote the letters. The passive voice is the letters were written. In the future simple, he will write the letters. The letters will be written. Present continuous tense. We have example. He is writing the letters. It can be transformed to passive as the letters are being written. In the past continuous, he was writing the letters. It can be transformed as the letters were being written. There is a going to form. Let us look at an example in the active voice. He is going to write the letters. This can be transformed to passive as the letters are going to be written. In the present perfect, the active voice example is he has written the letters. The passive voice is the letters have been written. In the past participle, the active voice example is he had written the letters. The passive voice is the letters had been written. In the infinitive active voice example is, he has to write the letters. The passive voice form is, the letters have to be written. In the example of models, the active voice sentence is, he must write the letters. The passive voice form is, the letters must be written. Friends, let us look at this active and passive voice diagram. In this diagram, we have a sentence. It reads as, Leslie took this photograph yesterday. Here in this sentence, Leslie the subject. Took is the active verb. This photograph is the object. Whereas yesterday is said to be complement. Well, how can we transform this sentence into a passive sentence? Well, to transform this active voice into passive, just look at this. We see here, this photograph, the object becomes the subject of the passive voice. The verb took is changed as was taken. Leslie, before writing Leslie, we write by, and then we write Leslie, by Leslie. At last, we retain the complement in the same position where it was. Just observe this diagram. Friends, as you have observed in the diagram, the object of the active voice sentence becomes the subject of the passive voice sentence. Let's look at another example, where we will see Agatha Christie wrote this book. This book is said to be the object. This object is going to become the subject of the passive voice. See, I have written as, this book was written by Agatha Christie. This is the first and foremost thing you should know while transforming a sentence from active to passive voice. Friends, the second important thing you have to consider while changing from active to passive voice is change of verb. The passive voice is formed by using a form of auxiliary verb be, followed by the past participle of the main verb. The auxiliary verb be includes be, am, is, are, was, were, being, etc. Friends, we change the main verb of the active voice sentence into passive voice. Always change the verb in the passive voice into past participle. The tense remains unchanged in the passive voice. Now let us know how to use being, been and models. The word being is used with continuous tense forms. For example, is being, are being, was being, were being. Likewise we use it. Let's look at being. How to use being in passive form. Being is used with as, have, had. Example, has been, had been, have been. Likewise it is used. Let's look at some of the models. Models, be is used with model. Be is used with models and infinitive forms like can be, could be, shall be, should be, will be, would be, may be, might be, must be, has to be, have to be, had to be. Friends, sometimes you will find double object verbs. When we have verbs that take two objects like give somebody something, we can convert the active sentence into passive one in two ways. By making the indirect or animate object the subject of the passive voice sentence, which is also the way that we usually prefer. Let's look at this example. Rick gave me this book. Here me is the indirect object and this book is the direct object. Voice is I was given this book by Rick. Let's look at the second type where we can convert this double object verb into passive. It is by making the direct or inanimate object of the passive voice. In the same example, the answer is, this book was given to me by Rick. Let's look at some of the verbs that take two objects. They are give, tell, send, show, bring, write, offer, pay, etc. Now let's come to the concept of the subject of the active voice becoming the agent. Let's look at this example. My grandfather planted this tree. It is an active voice form. This can be transformed as, the tree was planted by my grandfather. In both these sentences, you will find my grandfather. In the active voice, you will find my grandfather in the position of the subject. Whereas in the passive voice, the second sentence, you will find by my grandfather. That has become the agent in the sentence. Thus, we will come to know that the subject of the active verb has become the agent of the passive verb. The agent is very often not mentioned. Further, when it is mentioned, it is preceded by the preposition by, and even it is placed at the end of the clause. Now let us know the use of agent by. We use this preposition by at the end of the sentence to say who did the action, that is to refer to the agent. For example, the name like by Peter, the noun like by the teacher, and a pronoun like by him. We usually refer to the agent when it gives us important information which would otherwise be missing from the sentence. For example, our house was designed by a famous architect. We don't mention the agent or doer of the action. Let's look at some of the instances. If we do not know who the doer is, we don't mention the doer of the action. For example, our car was stolen last night. Here, we do not know who stole the car. The second incident is, if we are not interested in who has done what we are talking about, or it is not important to mention. For example, he has been taken to hospital. What we are interested is the fact that he has been taken to hospital and not who has taken him. Friends, it is easy to understand who did something without being mentioned. In that context also, we don't mention the agent. Let us look at this example. The murderer has been arrested last night. It is not necessary to mention that he has been arrested by the police because it is self-evident. The fourth incident, where we don't mention the agent or the doer of the action. That is, if the subject of the active sentence is something like somebody, people, they, you, etc. Let's look at some examples. Someone broke the window. The window was broken. With respect to change of active sentence into passive sentences, we want to consider change the subjective personal pronouns into objective personal pronouns. If the indirect object of the active voice sentence is personal pronoun, it has to be changed into subjective pronoun to be the subject of the passive voice sentence. Let's look at the chart I have given here. You can see subjective personal pronouns I, we, you, he, she, it, they, and they can be changed respectively as objective personal pronouns as me, us, you, him, her, it, them. Friends, when the indirect object is alone after the verb in the passive voice sentence, it needs a preposition to. Let's look at an example. They gave Bob a CD player for his birthday. This can be transformed as a CD player was given to Bob for his birthday. Here, to Bob is used as a preposition to link a single alone object. Only transitive verbs can be transformed into passive structures. However, you can notice that active sentences containing certain verbs cannot be transformed into passive structures. To have is the most important of these verbs. Friends, we can say he has a new cycle, but we cannot say a new cycle is had by him. Let me give a brief list of such verbs. They are resemble, look like, equal, agree with, mean, contain, hold, comprise, lack, suit, fit, become, etc. These verbs are intransitive. They cannot be transformed into passive structure.